I want to begin from some of the probing questions that we've been asked by His Grace, Most Reverend Anthony Muheria, Archbishop Anthony Muheria. First of all, he was asking, should the church be involved in politics? And I want to build on that premise and ask this question. Is mediation the means that integrates the church into the mainstream politics? Is mediation the means that integrates church into the mainstream politics? Should we begin from there? Let me just begin with you, Bishop Alfred Rotich.
Should the church?
Is mediation the means that integrates the church into the mainstream politics?
Is a path, is a way. And if we enter into mediation, is to participate in the life of Jesus Christ, because he's the mediator par excellence. He mediates and gives us a perfect covenant. And if he invites us to be his disciples, therefore mediation is our right, is our mandate, and actually gives a powerful witness that God, who gave us Jesus Christ as a mediator, is God with us. And therefore, involving us in this mediation, if we only knew that we are participating in everyday making covenants that God be known, and therefore entering into politics is such a calling that we cannot deny, we cannot escape. And therefore mediation is what we call entering into metropolis Jerusalem that we are talking about, to participate in the life, what the Archbishop said, in values that transcends higher values, and therefore refusal to enter into mediation before, during, and after a conflict. Entering is a very sacred mission for me that requires humility, that requires courage, that requires virtuous life.
Thank you, Bishop Rotich. Maybe I will just also invite Canon Chris Kinyanjui as well to just chime in on that particular question briefly.
Thank you very much. In our Lord's Prayer, we start by acknowledging our Father. We say, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. The import of that part of the prayer is acknowledgement of our relationship with God as our Father. And the fact that we want the kingdom of God to be established here on earth. And God did that by sending his Son, who Bishop Rotich has already mentioned, as our mediator with God. But Paul in his writings goes on to say that we have been called to a ministry of reconciliation. Because of the fallenness of man, our relationship with God, our relationship with each other is broken. And therefore the ministry that Christ has given us is to reconcile. And reconciliation is mediation. We ourselves must first be reconciled to God, and then we can be able to reconcile people to each other. And therefore our role in politics is to make sure that the relationship between our leaders, the relationship between our people is good. And that is our role. We can never abscond on our responsibility. And therefore politics is part of the way we relate one with another. And that is our role. It's 100% as part of our ministry. And if we don't do it, we'll be absconding on our responsibility. Thank you.
I like it. It's 100% part of our ministry. If we don't do it, we'll be absconding our ministry. Let me come to you, Bishop Kepha Omae, and ask you, when we're really talking about politics, and of course we're interfacing this particular discussion with political strife, as it were, we have this existential argument that church mediation tends to occur in countries with weak political institutions, or where political instability threatens the rule of law. Do you fly with this particular argument?
It's interesting. When we talk about the place of the church and the role the church should play in terms of reconciliation, adding from what he has said, Reverend Chris, and then come to the question. It takes me back to what Jesus Christ said. In the scriptures, we read of the commandments we've been given, the word of exhortation as brought to us by the apostles, and then 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 18, talks of all things belong to God. And we have been given a ministry. I believe it begins before, during, and after. So we don't come in, if I got your question right, Inea, when there is a crisis or a conflict. I believe our responsibility based on scripture is to shepherd not only our congregations, but shepherd our communities and shepherd the entire world with the truth, because we are the pillar of truth as the church. So it is before, during, and after, and that comes in through discipleship and teaching our people what the Word of God says about engaging not only in politics, but also occupying the spheres of influence where our people work. I know we are focusing so much on politics, but we were upstairs and we were having a discussion, and we said, we have quite a number of believers who are at the marketplace in the different spheres of influence. And the truth of the matter is, what is done in church in terms of discipleship is actually extended to the marketplace. So we don't come in when there is a conflict or when there is an issue. It begins before, during, and after. That is part of our mandate in terms of discipling and shepherding our people. So, in a way, what you have asked brings me to a place that the kind of a mindset most of our people have, that the church only comes in when there's a crisis, I think need to be demystified. As far as I'm concerned, and from where I sit, we have a divine mandate of discipling nations. And one of the ways we disciple nations is by helping our people to know what's expected of them when they're in the house of God, in the place of worship, when they're at the marketplace. For example, we have quite a number of brothers and sisters here that are occupying high places of responsibility at their places of work. I see them as the extension of God's will wherever they are. I therefore want to say it begins before, during, and after. And therefore that statement itself has so much to debate on.
True. And of course, predicating that on the preventative conflict as well, we can say this is a preventative mediation. So it doesn't really have to come at the tail end. But I want just to come to you, Your Grace, Most Reverend Archbishop Muheria, and ask you, yes, with this particular question, are we finding our political institutions woefully inadequate, that now when we come to general election, like we have in 2022, we'll find ourselves in that particular place where there's a spawning ground and tension and strife, vicious cycle that is recurring most in times. Woefully inadequate political institutions that we need maybe to be talking about instead of the church coming in at the end?
I think you're right. Mediation brings about, there is something that has not worked. There's a conflict. And I would say conflict is caused by a non-compliance to a tenet of one of the parties, and most times it is a tenet of either not just political persuasion, but underlying truthfulness or lack of it, underlying issues that have come which have become personal, etc. So it's actually evil at the base of causing conflict. So while we must necessarily be engaged in mediation, I think the church has a role to preventing these moments of mediation. That's what you're calling preventive mediation. But I'd rather call it the formation of persons who have got the credibility, or have persons who've got the authentic Christianity, to the effect that they do not have to end up into a conflict moment. People able to say sorry, or I was wrong, or let's sit, let's reason together, of their own accord. So we as church and our engagement in politics must also be at the cradle, at the nurturing. So I feel that is one. Second, the whole arena of politics is interconnected. And so you're speaking about the institutions. It's not enough that we be in those institutions that manage or are there to meet with the whole political dynamism. It is important that we form, we forge people with minds, hearts, convictions, and the credibility in those places to do what is right. So yes, there is a gap there. There's a gap in our institutions. But there's a gap in institutions because there's a gap in the church of the lay people. And that is something we must address. If our leaders were better formed and better Christians and better convinced and more heroic and courageous, then the institutions will work. Then we'll have leaders who are willing to listen even to the church leaders. And then mediation will become something very rare because we will easily agree, in spite of the diversity, on something that is good to do and is a win-win for all. So I think mediation is important when there is a lack of full living of the faith, or full living of that vocation we spoke about earlier. But we as church have a mandate and responsibility to nurture and create those people and the places where they can live up to the authentic faith.
Thank you. Bishop Rotich, if you can hack back into the Kenya's history, is there any highlight and a high spot moment that you can see the church really stepped in and there was there was a good mediation that was done, a happy medium that we had, say maybe for the 2007, where we saw also the church was totally divided as far as the politics of the day was concerned? What really comes up in your mind?
Yes, stories are told, and many a times when a chef is in the kitchen, you might not know how much he or she has burnt herself in making a good cake. And therefore, there are moments in this country where we have gone through what we call fires, yes, and we saw. Mm-hmm. But the presence of the church, the calming force that comes from Christ himself when we pray, when we discern, when we meditate, when we give a powerful witness and believe in what that word that His Grace mentioned about Jesus Christ, then you come in and you calm a situation. Well, I have experience with our brothers in both the terrain of politics. There were moments when we thought the country was going to the dogs. But what called us to action was awareness that there is a mediator, Jesus Christ, who has come and He's with us. And therefore stepping in as when you are called because you are listening. A point that was mentioned here was to listen. And listening is not just with your ears, but the inner ears of our faith. And therefore it involves you And when you move to a situation like that as a church, the waves, the currents of violence, and the seas calm, beginning a moment. And that's what I want to credit the fraternity that is here, the church, represented by a number who are here, and we being participant, I saw some hush in the sea. I believe Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. The recognition that the people in war, the people who are in conflict, are God's people. And you are called. And when you listen to that voice, then when you go in, when you move in with that power, you can see calmness. And therefore, I want to say, yes, we can tell a testimony of one or two instances where we and the brothers who are seated here got an opportunity to be able to interact, and therefore even praying for what we call building of bridges, because there were ladders being built. They were erecting walls, but there was no pontifex, there was no bridges, we could not cross. And I remember moments like when we were intervening with the IBC and we were near a hotel in this city, and we saw a bridge. And at that moment we said, let the church start building bridges. What you hear in the media is a product of a work that was knitted by the church. When I mean church, and people of goodwill. And therefore, what we had also in the presentation about mediation, the courage to do the right things when you have assessed the ground, was present when a number of us representing the faith here moved in. And I would say a humbling situation, but a big testimony and a big plus to the church for having stepped in. And therefore, what we in this congregation, I said with a lot of humility, is the fruit of hard work. It is not a product of one day. You have to enter into it with all self, like when the soul, the mind, and whole yourself. So I would say I have moments when I have experienced this.
Thank you.
As a person, but collectively, I
Right.
saw a very powerful intervention.
Fantastic. So the church really stepped in for the moment, but also listening into what his Most Reverend was telling us this morning was the fact that there's some tardiness. He called it a tardiness when it comes to engaging in mediations when we're stepping into that particular moment. And this is the idea of the mediator independence and impartiality, which is central, of course, to what he said was the efficacy of political mediation today. And the church has been caught up in that particular web where sometimes in mediation and that particular moment, we want to climb the ladder rather than build that particular bridge. You want to soak up the spotlight. Maybe you can allude to this, Reverend Canon Kinyanjui.
Good. Thank you very much. I think Bishop Rotich has mentioned the bridge. And in this country, the bridge is something very symbolic and also very political. And the intention of the church leaders when they suggested the building of the bridges, it was the rebuilding of bridges between communities and between our leaders. Having said that, I think to go back to what His Grace Archbishop Muheria mentioned, is that mediators, especially us as church, we are more or less like midwives. The midwife is not the owner of the baby. The midwife is not a parent, it's not a mother, it's not even the father. The mediator is there to complete a certain process and to get a common good that benefits those that are involved in it. And I think it's very, very critical that the church in this country has played a very good role in coming in, sometimes and in most cases, not even seeking the glory of the moment or to be credited. And the entire Building Bridges initiative was an initiative of the church in this country, together with the other faith leaders. But of course, as mediators, this was taken over by the political leadership, which should be the case, because we come in to build relationships and to build trust that can be able to move the country forward for the good of every Kenyan. So as we move forward, and even now as we know that the process have had issues and setbacks, which are also expected. It is also to say that all of us as Christians, not just the people in front here who are the leaders, all of us who call ourselves Christians, we must ask ourselves, what is our role in mediating the challenges and the setbacks that are there? We know what are the issues that we had in 2017, for example. Why was there violence? Why was the elections or the presidential elections nullified? Have those issues been resolved? And therefore, our work is cut out in terms of mediation and in terms of going in there and talking to different parties so that we do not leave the gap. And that role is something that the church leaders that you see here and some of you that are with us in this meeting are continuing to do. But as I conclude, politics is local. Politics is local. All politics is local. So let us not see mediation at the summit, at the higher level, at the national level, as the penultimate. We must go back to our villages and our counties and our regions and also make sure that mediation and reconciliation and building of bridges and relationship is also taking place there. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, maybe just briefly, because I also noted that NCCK has professed that it is ready and willing to mediate unity between the president and his deputy for the sake of peace and national cohesion. This was pronouncement made by Bishop Peter Muheria. I'm wondering, how are you planning to do this in light of what we're going right now in the country? Briefly.
Thank you very much. The National Council of Churches is working on several fronts, especially with our 9 regions. And what we have realized that the relationship between our president and his deputy is an issue. And the church leaders at our own level, we are working on that. Some of the church leaders that you see here in front are already involved. It's not an effort that is an NCCK effort only. Mm-hmm. It is spreading across the church and it's an ongoing activity. And we are very happy. We don't want to speak much about it, but it's something that we are working in the background and we want to see better relationship between our leaders at the top. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Briefly, if I may just come to you, Bishop Omae, as well, because I can see we're also really pinched for time. There's a Journal of Philosophy, Culture and Religion, which is an international peer-reviewed journal and a book publication. And they had, a very good seminal study on our current politics and where church is involved as well. And the study came up with some recommendations. They were saying that the Presidential Advisory Committee should include a senior minister who is either a bishop or a pastor to provide direction and advice in case of any decision that touches on spiritual matters. I know that is really happening right now also. His Grace is a part of that advisory committee. Also, the study recommends that amendments be made to the Constitution to make a legal requirement that one of the nominated MPs must be from the church. Your reaction? Do you think that's the way to go? Since, yes, we're trying to uncouple and demystify that church and politics, they're not diametrically different. I mean, of course, they should not be diametrically different. They should be enmeshed together.
I think the recommendation from the scholars is legitimate, or they're legitimate, the recommendations which are there.
Yes.
Out of the research that was done. Why a clergy? Why a bishop? Why a church minister in those spaces? Is to shepherd the leadership that is in office. I'll give a good example. Here we have, for example, our Archbishop, His Grace, who chairs a very important forum of the Interreligious Council, giving guidance and counsel on matters touching COVID-19 and other related issues. I believe whoever came up with that advice got it right. Because when you begin to deal, especially with the church and religious institutions in a country, somehow, in a way, the clergy understand the dynamics of the interreligious or the religious bodies that are in a country, in a nation. And they are able, by God's grace, to advise the national leadership on what needs to be done and what shouldn't be done at a given time, especially during this time, if I can mention. I believe we are so blessed that we have this team that was appointed in place, because we can end up trespassing boundaries that we shouldn't trespass or go beyond as a nation in terms of decision making, and yet God could be speaking something else that is completely different from what the national leadership could be thinking. When you have men of God and servants of God in those places, these are men and women that pray, they hear from God, they are able to give divine direction as we see it in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. No king, and this should be heard loud and clear, ever went to war. Whoever understood the place of the prophets went without consulting the prophets. They'll always even ask, is there a prophet in this city, in this town?
Thank you.
So that we can consult with him. So I believe we need servants of God to occupy those places, but they should be men and women that have skill. Skill
Thank you.
and expertise very key to sit in those places.
Thank you. Archbishop, if I may come to you briefly as we're winding up as well. The question of mediation and negotiation, and I know you alluded this also to in your speech as well this morning. In this country, we've never had that particular moment of mediation, but negotiation, which is a short-term band-aid solution, right? Vis-a-vis with mediation, do you think that we need as a country to seriously and keenly look into mediation, because we always have band-aid solutions?
Thank you. Allow me very briefly to answer you and touch on what Bishop Kepha said.
Sure.
I think the distinction, mediation is a long process and also a long haul process. Negotiation is a momentous process where I negotiate for this specific. Mediation means you are constantly engaged. It is a continuous tense. Negotiations are normally present tense. We've negotiated a deal and that negotiation ends there. Mediation is something that is going to flow. This is what I would say. That's why the church must work more towards mediation, even in negotiation processes. The second point, I believe, and I'm a firm believer, in organic governance, not in personalized or personalistic governance. The idea of putting a church leader in a position would be the wrong way to go. What we should be asking is to put councils, is to put organs, consultation organs. It is something that becomes more institutional and not just a momentous satisfaction of the sector of the church by giving them a consolation prize. That's what it ends up being. But if you have an organic consultation mechanism that goes to and fro, then that will outlive the people and the members there and outlive the leadership. So that in our way of governance, the church or the governance must consult, must have those relational consultation, not just to have a position, having a minister of religion would not help the church in governing and giving direction, because the church is a bigger body. I feel it would be very reductive. So in my view, what we must work towards is organic governance, institutional way of relating, in which we are in control and we are not controlled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. And I know right now, yes, as I mentioned, time is not really on our side, and we want to give you also a handy opportunity to ask questions or share your contribution briefly. That will be in person here in the house, and of course those who are joining us as well online. And I want just to hand over to, of course, my co-host as well to just take that opportunity so that, you have a chance to pepper our panelists with more questions.
Wow, thank you so much. This panel is amazing, and in the interest of time, we are going to start with our online questions. Are we not seeing the conversations are very candid? And I know a lot of the questions coming even from viewers, both from the floor and online, is once in a while we are seeing, are there divergent opinions? I am comforted. If Barnabas and Paul could disagree, I mean, these people had just freshly experienced Jesus firsthand, not us 2,000 years later, could disagree and get along fine down the line. We are in the right place and God is here. Amen. So the first question, which is very intriguing, from Ambassador Peter Gitao, is that in 2007, it seemed as if the church lacked the credibility, or the politicians did not trust the church enough to allow church to lead mediation. And so the question is that as a result of the lack of unity in the church, and what can be done about that? The second question, so there's the first question about 2007, the church seemed not to have a credibility. Is that because of a lack of unity, and what can be done about it? Edward Mwakio is asking, do all the bishops across the various denominations agree on the premises that we are laying out here? And I think he's asking, based on the premises His Grace has already laid out in terms of mediation, are we all on the same page? And then the third question is, and a very, very heavy one, there are a number of stalemates, and I think it has been mentioned, there seems to be a stalemate at the executive office. What about the perceived or a real stalemate between judiciary and executive? Is that a space where church can be able to engage? We can start with those three questions, then the next round of questions will come from the floor.
Could you remind me that Edward Mwakiro's question again, just to make it very clear?
The Edward Mwakio question was, do all bishops across the nation agree on the premises that we are laying out for mediation? Are we on the same page on that?
Fantastic. Maybe we can begin with Bishop Rotich on this. The 2007, do you think we lacked credibility, right? If the church also is heavily steeped into the history of conflict as well. We normally see splits, divisions as well. Could that also have contributed to lack of credibility? His mic, please. Has it gone off? I can sanitize mine, use mine in the meantime.
I think there were many triggers to 2007. And those triggers ignited what we saw. One, not because of lack of credibility, but because of what happened in 2005, the referendum. Already, persons perhaps may have been wooed to both sides. Which side was you voting for? And yes, because of lack of what we call organic, what we call unified strategy, then the politicians' plan is what came out. And they succeeded in dividing the house. Yes, we can say for lack of planning, then we failed. But that does not say that work has not been done. So I will loosely say, yes, there was lack of planning, but not that credibility. But we can lose credibility in the future if we are not conscious of what are we doing now. So I think it became a challenge, and now it is an opportunity. 2007 is something that we need to use as a story for reconciliation, a story for planning. And we need to invest now for the future. And as we have said elsewhere, that now we want to be this. We now want to enter into the mediation as a right of the church. So I say I will not point a finger to 2007 as lack of credibility, but what we call an oversight. Perhaps there was triggers that generated what we saw in 2000, and we cannot really say an apportion to the church, but as a church now we can say, yes, since we saw what happened, what can we use as a pillar for tomorrow so that we may not enter into the same fray?
Fair enough, thank you. So the next question was from Edward Mwakiri, and he was asking about if there is any conference and consensus as far as agreement is concerned on the sentiments that we have and that is being espoused here as far as the mediation is concerned. Maybe I can just give you this particular chance, Bishop Omae, to answer that. Are we in agreement?
Yeah, because I've interacted with quite a number of our church leaders, and I can say this confidently. I sit in a number of forums that brings quite a number of our bishops and senior clergy together. From the evangelical side, we have the EAK, we have a coalition called KCCM. We have also, for the church in Kenya, the Dialogue Reference Group. And of course, some of our leaders are in this forum. And I can tell you, the first meeting we had when this summit was brought to our attention, and we said, this is an idea whose time has come. And some of the leaders who were in that meeting embraced the vision. And we said, we have had our past. We have had challenges. Like Bishop Rotich said, yes, there are some of the dynamics that in a way put the church on spot. And we said, we are not going to allow this time politicians to divide us as a Christian community. We are not going to allow our pulpits, our altars to be desecrated, and a number of us to be enticed with money so that we are swayed to a given direction. We said, it's time we came together to have a conversation. And I can tell us, yes, we have had challenges before, but across the board, interdenominationally, I can say this without any hesitation. The church leadership is happy with what is happening, and they are supporting this initiative. If you log in online, yesterday I did, you will see a number of bishops and pastors, the senior clergy who are following this summit from the comfort of their offices. Some are in the counties, those who are able to follow. And after this, the way forward is going to change the perception that most people have had, and even the leadership in this nation will have to listen to the church, and there will be no alternative.
Thank you. You agree, sir, that question on perception, credibility, and of course, denomination credibility that you are alluding to is the wonderment that we have and this is what was being posed in that particular question. How do we come with remedial measures on restoring, the posture and the poise of the church in terms of, institutional credibility, in terms of a person accreditation as well?
That, of course, while we are Church of Christ in the sense of being all Christians, the onus of making the institutional credibility or denominational credibility lies on the leaders of each denomination in a very special way. And I think is a sum total of each one of us as a church, how much we are striving towards it. In my thinking, I do believe that the first thing we must do is to be above board, and this is when we speak even about corruption, is to be above board about transparency in our own church operations. It must be very clear that what we demand in the public arena, we are already demanding in our ecclesial arena, meaning transparency about our finances, transparency about our management. If we expect people who are worthy, honorable, to sit in the political arena, we must also reflect it in our own bodies, be they at the local level, as Canon Kinyanjui was saying, but also at the higher level. So I think it's a wake-up call for us to be a mirror of what we want. Credibility and trust can never be forced. Credibility is born of itself. They trust you or they don't. Unfortunately, it also goes very quickly. If you do something totally abhorrible, then you lose all credibility, no matter how much you've built it. So I think it is a question of how do they see us? How do they see us reflecting? When we speak to issues in this country, do they read partisan behind it? When we speak to issues, do we read honesty and truthfulness? I think that is what we have been asked to reinvent. And so we must look in our statements. We are not, at times there is a feeling that the church must necessarily be combative. The question is, what do we show by being combative? Perhaps we need to know how to speak in the moments in a way that reflects and helps the growth of credibility. So this is just 3 areas. I'm sure there are many more, but these are ones which occur to me right now.
Yes, and I know there are many more. So we want to give you that opportunity as well, just to take the last round of questions. Then
yes, there's one question which I don't know has been addressed. The issue about mediating between the executive and judiciary. I think that's a standing question. You can have that in the second round. I will allow for a question from the floor. Please, may I see your hands kindly? But by now, you do know I have a bias to women, so because of the excess of time today, for the first time, I'm having 2 ladies with their hands up, so I'll allow both of them. So I think a lady at the front kindly, and one with the red tag, kindly come to the front. And so I think the first question, as I've said, which is still pending, is the issue of mediation between the executive and the judiciary.
Right, let me just give a sporting chance to Bishop Rotich. Yeah, we know that is a stalemate right now. Yes, how can the church come in and mediate right now?
Well, we know the individuals that are involved. They are our brothers. Before we get to the structure, I think we need to consolidate the efforts within and have a plan. Once we have a plan, we must see and send the barometers, what is happening, and then let's also have them be invited, because this is in our agenda. Mediation is in our court, and therefore I think we need to seize this moment, whilst of course I know there are efforts to bring these 2 structures together, but we need to multiply. And the multiplication is that the structures and the structure that we consolidate. Not many people will go, of course, but we will discern who goes where and who comes with what. Like say, for example, in Psalm 126, 27, it said, we go out with tears, but will come out with a full harvest. So I think we need to consolidate, we need to pray about it, and we need to communicate to either parties, and of course, prepare the way. So I think it is possible to unite, to speak about it, and we must express it with confidence and courage, of course, and the goodwill from both sides.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, before we come down there, it will be also nice to hear from a legal person from that particular perspective. We have, the alternative conflict resolution mechanism as a provision of a constitution as well. So is this a handy opportunity for the church to actually try and mediate? We have a good case right now to try and push this particular notion that we're talking about, uncoupling the church and politics.
Yes.
Very briefly.
The issue and the kind of dispute that we see between the executive and the judiciary, it's not something that is new, especially for church leaders. We have had audiences with key leaders in this country, and this is something that we have raised as a concern that there is need to see more coherence and reach out and so on. But having said that, is that we are also implementing a new constitution, and we're just 10 years or so into implementing it. And therefore, there are challenges that will come in terms of the way powers have been shared, for example, between the executive and the judiciary. And there's also a learning curve. So it is a very ripe issue for mediation. As church leaders, we have offered to do that, and we have been doing that. And we hope that a solution is going to be found.
Thank you. Right, let's hear from you as well. Your question?
My name is Dr. Greta Mudhoni, and church and politics. Listening to the conversations, there are some questions I would want to ask.
Could we take one, please, if you don't mind?
Yes.
For the interest of time.
One is the mediation. Is church ready to position itself in the politics? If it does, should mediation not be minimized because we have the people of like mind? Mediation, as being analyzed by Bishop Kinyanjui, that you are not the owner of the child, a custodian of the property or whatever you might be negotiating or midwifing. What are you in the whole situation? Do you want to possess? Do you want to take over with the virtues and the values you have for the country?
Thank you, Dr. Mudhoni. If you may just summarize your question in one phrase, what will that question be? Dr. Mudhoni, don't go away. Yeah, so just for the clarity of your question, if you may summarize your question in one line, for the benefit also of the digestion of my panelists, what will your question be?
Yeah, another question?
No, that first question, just a one-liner.
Just on one line, it is, okay, is church ready to position itself in this country?
We'll leave it at that. Dr. Omae, you can just answer that very briefly because of interest of time.
Out of what has been presented from the speakers and even the discussants, and I think the message is coming out very clear. Not that we have not been positioned before. I think, let me say this, when we talk about politics, remember we have our brothers and sisters who are in the political space. Already, they are there. Number two, we have a number of our brothers and sisters in our congregations who are in key positions of leadership. Now we are saying, when it comes to the politics of the country, I think that's what the focus seems to be so much on that. We are saying, we are ready to do what must be done as per what we have heard from the speakers to identify men and women of integrity, like Canon Imbogo said, that we can actually support with much prayer, that we can work with in terms of discipleship, and ensure when they occupy those seats,
thank you,
they are able to deliver.
Right.
We are ready, and that's why we have this summit.
Right, so the church stands at the ready. Let's have the next question, please. Brevity is of essence as well because of time. Make it very brief.
Thank you so much. I come from Laikipia where there is conflict. So today's about mediation has actually built me. And I think I have to ask this question that have actually been a problem to us. I want to ask about the mediation, where the mediation is taking place and the culture is deep-rooted, and now the mediation is being taken by the elders. How will the church position itself in a deep-rooted culture? And then I want to know, in the context of maintaining neutrality in the mediation process, at what time is the church supposed to tell someone you are wrong? Thank you.
Thank you. Did I have your name, please? Sorry. Mary?
I'm Susan Kamiru.
Susan, thank you,
Yes.
Susan. Bishop, I think Laikipia really borders Inea as well, and you might be very cognizant of what is happening, with this particular conflict as well. So she's asking, when it comes to deep-rooted culture, how does the church also position itself?
I think it is part of the mission of the church to evangelize, that meaning putting the gospel values into cultures, into structures. That's what evangelization is about. It's not just about winning people to your sector or to your church. It's about informing and giving soul to the things that we already live in. So, in the case of those conflicts, it is, I think the church, when we speak about positioning, I think our mind is too stuck into what I claim the fear, the danger of clericalization of the church. We are thinking of church leaders. We're forgetting that real church are the people who are baptized. And they don't need to reposition themselves because they belong and are the society. What we need is to activate their being Christians. They are being accountable in those areas. So in those conflicts, it is my thinking that if we are able to speak the gospel values and see the gospel values already inherent in the culture, it becomes easy to have a dialogue. They don't have to be Christians because gospel values are perennial and also common to across the board. And then I think my last comment as a parting shot is that we need to focus about our people. And the church is not, it has a fantastic and powerful tool. We have our congregations. We have our followers. Let us spend time and invest in making them better Christians and in nurturing their professionalism and nurturing their leadership. If we do that, then we will not be asking about repositioning because they will sprout and blossom wherever they are.
Thank you very much. I want to appreciate you, our panelists, for graciously consenting to be part of this discussion. I think we've had a very cogent, insightful discussion as well. Bishop Kepha, Omae Liberty Christian Center, the presiding bishop, want to thank you so much as well. Your Grace, Most Reverend Archbishop Anthony Muheria, thank you very much for coming through today as well. Also, Reverend Canon Kinyanjui, the General Secretary of NCCK, thank you for coming through. And finally as well, Bishop Alfred Rotich, Bishop of Kericho Diocese, thank you for coming through. And thank you very much also for being amazingly patient and listening in. Also, virtually, we want to appreciate your questions as well and contribution. Thank you. A round of applause again for our panelists as they exit the stage.